Most people spend their entire lives misreading others. They judge by what someone says, by how they dress, by how friendly they seem. But Friedrich Nietzsche, one of history's sharpest psychological minds, argued that the truth of a person is never found on the surface. It's buried in the patterns they can't control, the silences they can't fill, the behaviors they never question. What if reading people had almost nothing to do with what they tell you? Psychology and philosophy revealed that human behavior follows deeply predictable structures, and Nietzsche mapped them with unsettling precision more than a century before modern neuroscience caught up. In this video, you'll discover 18 psychological truths Nietzsche identified that let you see through people almost instantly. Some of these will challenge how you've been reading others your whole life. Stay until the end. The final insight might be the most important one you hear this year. Resentment is a confession. Nietzsche observed that what a person resents most reveals what they secretly desire, but believe they can never have. Psychology calls this frustrated aspiration, the gap between longing and perceived possibility. When someone attacks another person's success with unusual intensity, they're not expressing moral outrage, they're exposing a wound. If you want to understand someone quickly, notice what makes them bitter, not what makes them angry. Anger is reactive. Bitterness is architectural. It's built around something they gave up on. Next, here's a truth that plays out in almost every conversation. Repetition reveals obsession. Nietzsche wrote that a person's dominant drive will always surface, regardless of the topic. Modern cognitive psychology confirms this through the concept of cognitive salience. The mind returns compulsively to what it hasn't resolved. If someone keeps circling back to the same theme, money, betrayal, status, a specific person, that's not coincidence. That's their psychological center of gravity. Pay less attention to what they're talking about and more attention to what keeps pulling them back. That pull is the real story. Their reaction to being wrong tells you everything. Nietzsche distinguished between two types of people, those who pursue truth and those who perform it. Research in behavioral psychology confirms this split. It's called identity protective cognition. When a person's ego is fused with their beliefs, being contradicted doesn't feel like an intellectual challenge. It feels like an attack. Watch what happens the moment someone is proven wrong in conversation. Do they update? Do they deflect? Do they suddenly change the subject or attack your credibility? That split-second reaction is one of the most honest windows into someone's character you'll ever get. But here's what most people miss entirely. The company they elevate reveals their self-image. The company they diminish reveals their fear. Nietzsche argued that praise and contempt are never really about others. They're tools of self-construction. Social psychology research supports this. Downward social comparison is one of the primary ways people protect a fragile self-concept. When someone consistently makes others smaller, they're revealing a self that feels insufficient. By contrast, who they genuinely admire, not envy but admire, tells you what they most aspire to become. 2 questions, 2 answers. An almost complete psychological portrait. Words describe the self they want to be. Actions reveal the self that actually exists. This is perhaps Nietzsche's most practical psychological insight, and one that behavioral science has confirmed repeatedly. People sincerely believe their stated intentions. They're not usually lying. They're confusing aspiration with identity. The person who says they value honesty but gossips constantly isn't a hypocrite. They're someone whose behavior hasn't caught up to their self-narrative. Stop listening to what people say they value. Watch the 10-second decisions they make when no one's looking. Those decisions are the real vote. Humor is philosophy with a mask on. Nietzsche understood that comedy is never innocent. It's a socially acceptable container for truths people can't say directly. Psychological research on benign violation theory shows that humor requires a perceived incongruity, something that shouldn't be funny but is. What a person finds funny reveals what they believe violates norms. And when they are the source of the joke, that reveals what they secretly despise. The person who always makes self-deprecating jokes may not be confident. The person who only punches down may not be kind. Laughter is a confession. The performance ends the moment there's nothing to gain. Nietzsche was precise on this. Social behavior is largely strategic. People are well behaved toward those who can reward or punish them. But remove that incentive. Speak to a service worker, an intern, someone who can't advance or threaten them, and the mask slips. What you see then is the person beneath the performance. Research in social dominance psychology confirms that downward behavior, how we treat those with less power, is the most reliable indicator of character. Watch it once. Remember it always. People who fear silence fear themselves. Nietzsche believed that the capacity for solitude was one of the deepest markers of psychological strength. Modern research in self-concept clarity supports this. Individuals with a stable, coherent identity are more comfortable with unstructured time and quiet. Those with fragmented or anxious self-concepts compulsively fill silence with noise, conversively fill silence with noise, conversation, or distraction. Watch how someone responds to a quiet moment. Do they reach for their phone, fill the air immediately, or do they sit with it? That response tells you whether they're at home inside themselves or running from something. Their greatest pride reveals their deepest insecurity. This is counterintuitive, but Nietzsche observed that people most loudly celebrate the achievements that feel most precarious to them. Psychologists call this compensatory conviction. We overinvest identity in areas where we fear inadequacy. The person who never stops mentioning their degree, their salary, or their social connections is broadcasting the very place their confidence is thinnest. Genuine strength rarely announces itself. It has nothing to prove. Authentic joy at another's success is rarer than it looks. Nietzsche wrote that ressentiment, the psychology of envy, dressed as moral outrage, is one of humanity's most disguised drives. Neuroscience research confirms that for many people, a rival's success activates the same pain centers as physical discomfort. Someone who can celebrate others with genuine warmth, without qualification, without immediately pivoting to their own work. That reveals a secure, abundant psychology. Watch how long their congratulations lasts. Genuine warmth lingers. Performed warmth evaporates in seconds. Whatever someone guards most intensely is whatever defines them. Nietzsche identified that people build psychological fortresses around the things most central to their identity. Behavioral psychology calls these core personal projects the pursuits, relationships, or roles that, if threatened, feel existentially destabilizing. When you see disproportionate defensiveness, a reaction that seems too large for the situation, you've likely brushed against someone's core. This isn't weakness, it's information. It tells you what matters most and where they're most fragile. Everyone is the hero of their own narrative, but the role they cast others in is the tell. Nietzsche was fascinated by the stories people construct about their own lives. Narrative psychology, a field that emerged decades after his death, confirms that the way people structure their autobiographical story predicts their psychological health. Are others always the villain? Is life always happening to them? Or do they acknowledge complexity, their own role in failures, the humanity of those who hurt them? Victim-only narratives aren't always dishonest, but they are always incomplete. And that incompleteness is a psychological fingerprint. How someone treats rules when no one is watching reveals their internal moral architecture. Nietzsche distinguished between herd morality, following rules because of social pressure, and a genuine, self-authored ethical code. Psychology research on moral identity shows that people whose ethics are external behave very differently in private than those whose ethics are internal. Neither is purely good or bad, but the distinction is critical. Someone who follows every rule rigidly may not be moral. They may be afraid. Someone who breaks every rule may not be free. They may be reactive. True character is what someone does when the only observer is themselves. Discomfort tolerance is one of the most important psychological metrics, and almost no one talks about it. Nietzsche believed that the capacity to endure, even embrace suffering, was the hallmark of a powerful psyche. Modern psychological research on distress tolerance confirms that the ability to sit with uncomfortable emotions without immediately escaping predicts nearly every marker of mental health and life success. Watch what someone does in the first 30 seconds of boredom, frustration, or uncertainty. Do they reach immediately for relief, or do they breathe and stay present? That response is a window into decades of habit. Most people have two versions of themselves, observed and unobserved. The gap between them is the measure of their authenticity. Nietzsche called this the distance between the mask and the face. Social psychology research on self-monitoring shows this is a real, measurable trait. High self-monitors constantly adjust their presentation to the audience. Low self-monitors behave relatively consistently regardless of who's watching. Neither is inherently good, but the person who is radically different when they think no one is watching is someone whose social persona is largely constructed. The question isn't whether someone performs. Everyone does. The question is how much of the performance is compensating for something. A person's orientation toward time reveals their deepest psychology. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of fate, describes someone who has genuinely made peace with their past and doesn't need the future to rescue them from the present. Psychological research on temporal orientation shows that people who are chronically past-focused often carry unresolved grief or anger. Future-focused people often use planning to escape present anxiety, and present-focused individuals, not impulsive, but grounded, tend to report the highest well-being. Ask yourself, does this person live in memory, in anticipation, or in the actual moment in front of them? That orientation shapes everything about how they'll behave. People who deflect genuine warmth often carry the belief that they don't deserve it. Nietzsche wrote about the psychology of those who have internalized their own diminishment, who, when offered love, respect, or affirmation, immediately make themselves smaller or change the subject. Research in attachment psychology confirms this. Adults with insecure attachment styles often experience genuine care as threatening because it conflicts with a deeply held negative self-narrative. When you offer someone sincere appreciation and they immediately deflect or minimize it, that's not humility. That's a scar. It doesn't make them less worthy of care. It means they need more of it. This is the deepest truth Nietzsche identified, and the one that reveals a person's entire philosophical orientation. Some people are transformed by suffering. Some are defined by it. Some are destroyed by it. Nietzsche's entire philosophical project was built around this question. What do you do with the worst that happens to you? Psychology research on post-traumatic growth confirms that suffering can deepen meaning, strengthen identity, and expand compassion, but it requires a specific internal orientation, the willingness to find meaning rather than simply assign blame. Watch how someone carries their pain. Do they wear it as a wound or as a teacher? That choice, often unconscious, is the truest thing about them. Nietzsche wasn't simply a philosopher. He was one of history's most precise psychologists, cataloguing the invisible machinery that drives human behavior decades before the science existed to name it. These 18 truths aren't a guide to suspicion, they're a guide to clarity. The people in your life are speaking constantly in a language beneath language, in their resentments, their silence, their laughter, their pain. Learning to read that language doesn't make you cynical, it makes you compassionate. Because when you truly understand what drives someone, judgment becomes harder, and empathy becomes almost unavoidable. If this video gave you a new lens, subscribe for weekly psychology insights that help you understand yourself and others at a deeper level. And the next video explores something even more personal, the hidden psychological traits of people who think differently from everyone around them. You might see yourself in it.